Again, thanks for having me out here, spending the time today, almost an hour, working on ourselves. We're going to do a little deep dive on ourselves and our teams. Because everybody here has a team. You may not realize it, but you do. You have fans, you have people you influence. And the Harvard study on longevity and happiness, 75-year study, says the quality of your close relationships, the 30s and 40s, is a predictor of lifespan happiness. Those close relationships you have, the ones that you really connect up with on Instagram or whatever it is, right? Or the ones that, that little tiny community. Thanks. That little tiny community of people that you really, really have that deep connection with. That's lifespan happiness right there, according to the Harvard, like the Wechsler longevity study of 300 Harvard graduates and others in the community over 75 years. Just look that up, the Harvard longevity study. So everybody has a team. Everybody is a leader of themselves and of others, right? And so we're going to talk a little bit about that. That's what foresight skills for leaders are. So I have this slide up here, this deck from one of my clients, the Navy, and I figured I'd just put the same deck up that I use because it's helpful for, I think, the students here who are not yet senior leaders, but you're going to be, right? You're moving toward that. So if you think, what's it going to be like when I'm mid-career and second half of my career, and I think of myself as a senior leader, right? What's my life going to be like, and how am I skating towards that future, right? So there's my book. Like I said, please email me if you'd like a copy of it. I'd love to get any feedback from you. I'll send you the ebook tonight or tomorrow. So we're mainly going to talk, because we actually talked about 3 and 4 yesterday, so we're mainly going to talk about foresight development and foresight leadership. How many people here have heard of the OODA loop? Has anyone here heard of that? There we go. All right, from law enforcement background, yes. So this is an incredible concept that's actually a very basic idea in cognitive science, and it's one of the really most useful. I call it the foresight action cycle. So we're going to spend a little team time on that, okay? And like I said, today we're going to be doing more foresight, and yesterday we did more futures. That's the societal, global, and universal stuff. And today we're doing the personal and organizational way of thinking about foresight, okay? And, the futurists and the entertainers talking about the futures. But I'd like you all to think about using that word, foresighter, and realize that you are a foresighter. You're a planner. And if you do anything before strategy and planning, you're a foresighter too, okay? And there are places online where you can get more on this, on both of these ways of kind of doing foresight, okay? So this, I'm actually not going to use this. I'm just going to speak because it's uncomfortable for me. So
they can't hear over there.
Can you guys hear me now? No? Is there a handheld?
Or can we move?
Okay, it's all right.
We're trying to get
Okay. Yeah, I'll hunch over. Actually, you know what? I'll just go like this. It's better. Okay. Okay, good. That's okay. Hold on. Oh, you found it. Oh, perfect. Okay. So what I'd like you guys to do right now is on this handout. Please spend 5 minutes and see if you can read through and answer up to question 1D, and then we're going to talk about it, okay? So the first 2/3 of the first page, just read through and answer those things for yourself, and then we'll talk. Okay. Is that enough time? Yeah? Okay, good. How many people, well, this is new for them, this hindsight, insight, foresight. Pretty obvious, right? Some people, yeah. So who was a strong suit on the past? Could you share? Could one of you share? How does that work for you? What motivates you to think about the past a lot?
Strong all three, actually. So I think that's part of my job and
Who you are?
who I am. That I'm very cerebral, very much a thinker, and a planner and an organizer. But I'm also very much meditation and trying to not think or ruminate on the past too much. So trying to balance.
Fascinating. Anybody, thank you for sharing that. And you?
I don't have a mic, so I'm going to stand and project. Does that work?
Yay.
Okay. Yeah. Okay, there's a mic. I always wait for mics.
Oh, thank you.
Hello. Okay, I said past and present because in my day-to-day, I think a lot about work, and most of that is adapting data that we've gotten that's been collected in the past. So like, why did that happen? And then trying to think, what do I do about it now? Obviously, there's a bit of trying to figure out what's happening in the future, but more so I'm thinking about like, why did those things occur?
Right. Thank you, Aaron. So do we see anyone else want to comment? Share on past? Okay. So from Aaron's comment, I think we see this reality that there's people who are both tasked and inclined to think in any of those three areas. And that's, I think, step one is realizing the cognitive diversity that's there and being able to work with somebody who naturally has that skill when we need it, right? So that's really a step one, I think, of foresight, is realizing that there's these three time horizons that we're constantly going to. Now, both of our respondents talked about mindfulness. Actually, you did, sorry, first, yeah. So there's this hypothesis in mindfulness that we want to spend most of our time where? In the present. So it's like it's a 20-60-20 ratio is this kind of the general idea. There's this online thing you can take called Mindtime, mindtime.com, if you'd like. There's a free version and a paid, and it'll give you a sense of where you tend to live in those three, if you'd like. And the interesting thing about the mindfulness idea is we're all constantly flipping between all three of those based on our context, right? But the interesting thing about it is that whenever we recenter and come back to the present, we reduce stress and anxiety, and we get more of a sense of control. So whenever you do even a 20-minute mindfulness meditation, or if you take that Wobot thing that I mentioned and go through the cognitive behavioral discussion with the bot, you'll suddenly feel like, oh, okay, I'm back in the center again. How many people have heard of process meditation? Okay, so meditation, the way it's typically done, where you focus on your breathing, is actually process meditation. You're focusing on a thing. That thing doesn't require a lot of thinking, though. So you're really practicing turning off all those little mindsets that like to argue with yourself. Turns out you can do that same process meditation for anything that you've done regularly that's already kind of mostly unconscious for you. If you drive a long distance somewhere, you can actually do on your daily commute, you can process meditate the whole way. I recommend you try it once. Try to just focus on the driving and nothing else. And every time your mind wanders to some other past, present, or future thing, just bring it back to the present. See if that makes you feel really relaxed and centered when you arrive at your destination. Okay? Washing dishes. You've heard the expression, how you wash your bowl, right? In the Buddhist tradition. That's a process focus. So you get these benefits from recentering. Okay? And just lost my last example. That's a good one too. Okay, we'll come back. All right. So let's flip to the next page. And I'd like you guys to go through items G through, actually F through J. Let's do the whole thing. Think about whether
the way that you approach the past, present, and the future, how it interacts with your job and with other people. We'll talk about that. Again, 5 minutes. Okay. So let's ask about 1F. Does anybody think they have a significant mismatch or challenge between their orientation and their job? Anybody want to share on that? Thank you.
Our table was approved.
Thank you.
Yeah, so I have a day job that demands my attention fully. What's happening immediately, address immediate hot buttons, but I also have a startup. And the startup demands that I think for the future, but I only have time to do that in the evening or really early mornings. So I'm constantly stressed that I'm not anticipating what I should be anticipating and thinking about.
Fantastic. Thank you for sharing that, Carol.
Yeah, it's actually pretty similar. I like to spend my time planning for what's going to happen 5 to 10 years from now and see the things that have to be done to get it done, and trying to create urgency around those can be difficult. And so trying to a little more forward looking and less in the present.
Yep. So also have a startup and probably spend 70 to 80% of my time thinking about long-term future. Forgetting, of course, that the most endangered period for a startup is your first 2 years. And it's like, oh, wait, we need work now.
That's fantastic. Yeah. Priority setting actually is going to be our next exercise, John. So I'm curious what you're going to think about that.
So I think for my job, like I study trends, but I also struggle with, the business is always trying to keep in the forefront, like how we're doing today and what our numbers look like today versus, what the consumer is going to demand in the future, and how do we meet those needs with or without the current resources that we have access to. So I struggle with having the organization think farther out for the consumer's sake.
Okay, the entire rest of this handout is actually about this question. That's what made me generate it, is the mismatch between what we like to do in our minds and what we have to do to create value in society. There's a lot of skills. There's a lot of skills you can use. And the first step, I think, is to recognize the mismatch and see it the way John says. I got to focus on I got to survive. I got to get back to the present, because the data shows that's where the real risk is. So the first thing is to recognize it. And then I think the rest is to use some of these tools and realize there's a bunch of tools out there. So I remembered my mindfulness example. It's a really cool one, I think, because I did it was a 4-day-long meditation retreat, the only one I've ever done, and I got deep into it. Okay, this is cool. I'm going to check out all this stuff. And the coolest insight that I got, they wanted us to do half an hour to an hour every day the rest of our lives. That was the pitch, right? And the coolest insight I got, actually, because I'm a futurist, I was just going off on, kind of alternative ways of doing things. But I realized every time we go to sleep, we have about 10 to 15 minutes every time we go to sleep where we can do meditation as we're falling asleep. So I started looking into whether anybody said, is that bad or good? And there's actually people on both sides of the equation. But fortunately, I found people who said, yeah, that's a good idea. Anytime you can get an opportunity to meditate in our busy lives, do it, because it helps you be here now. It brings you back to the present. The way John said, sometimes I have to come back to the present, right? So I think one of the big insights about Foresight is to realize we're only doing it to come back to the present. And the same with history, with hindsight. So we have to organize those efforts, those journeys that we take out, and then bring that information back to action. And so every habit that we have that helps us come back to be here now is incredibly empowering, okay? And I'd like you guys all to go 3 feet above the top of your head right now and look down on the top of your head while you're looking out through your eyes. Pretty cool, huh? That's called the introspective mind. Being here now, it's just 2 things. It's introspection and extrospection. Seeing everything else that's around you, other people, empathizing with them, seeing your environment. That part of your mind that can do that, that's the really special, that's the executive mind, right? The executive forebrain. So anything you can do to get that control and that calmness and come back. So I recommend meditation when you go to sleep. Try it. I mean, just focus on your breathing until you fall asleep. You probably take 10 minutes. The coolest thing about it, by the way, and I've done this since I discovered that like 15 years ago, the coolest thing about it is, and I don't do it every night, I just do it when I feel I particularly need it, when my mind's racing or whatever. The coolest thing about it is, I lost that too. What was the coolest thing about it? I haven't had enough coffee this morning. All right. All right, it'll come to me too. Okay. So let's do one L and J. Who wants to share a positive and a negative experience around time orientation? And I'd like to hear negative first, if you don't mind. This is really particular. Anyone? Any brave souls want to talk about? Thanks.
So, yeah, wow, that's a lot of feedback there. So as a futurist, it's so easy to get out into the future. And a negative experience there for me has to do with not coming back and getting rerouted. When we start thinking about alternative futures and people start using the word like infinite opportunities and alternatives, that brings fear and it brings anxiety, and it can often get somebody super stressed out about, oh my gosh, I can't option plan for everything. And so one of the things that I've had to learn over time, I don't know it well, but I'm trying to learn, is to root back into the present, as John was talking about, back into mindfulness. It gives us context for the future, allows us to reorient the frame of the future to what we need to do today.
I did remember the coolest thing about meditating yourself to sleep is occasionally you won't be able to sleep. Like you have a big test the next morning or something, and it's like, oh my God, I can't sleep. The coolest thing about it is you get to meditate all night. And you will actually wake up almost as rested, not physically as rested, but mentally as rested. And you may discover you meditate for 3 hours and then finally your brain will just give up. It's okay, you can go to sleep now. Right? But the coolest thing about it is you're no longer scared if you have any kind of a sleep issue, insomnia issue. This is a super powerful technique, and it's in the literature, meditating yourself to sleep. So it's a useful thing. Right. And a thing on the meditation, on the negative side of experiences of time orientation that is listed a word here, and I heard someone mention it, is procrastination, right? So that's a big one for many of us. And if you think about what it is just from the time orientation perspective, it's being out of whack. It's being out of whack in your relationships with your future and your present, typically, right? You're not paying attention to a future that you should do. Now, some of us, we get our best performance right before a deadline. How many people are that kind of people? Right before a deadline. Oh. Now, how many of you also have an issue with procrastination? Same? Few. Okay, so it's not always the same thing. How many people love to do things ahead of time? Yeah. Okay, so I want to hear from one of those people. How do you get yourself to do it ahead of time?
You want me to talk? Okay. Okay. I am so different than my husband in this way, I got to say. I love getting it done because there's that sense of, first of all, I'm good to myself. I'm honoring my future self by not putting myself in the stress in that position. Frees my mind for what I know inevitably will be another challenge in the future. So I'm kind of managing for future challenges by doing it now, and then kind of awarding myself and being pleasantly at peace about some of those challenges. Yeah.
Thank you, Carrie. Who else wants to share on that? That was very sentiment driven, which is, of course, our emotion, right? Our emotion drives everything. And as Will was saying in his lovely book, our unconscious intuition, our system one intuition, is driving so much of everything. 35, was it 35 or 20? Is Will here? 35 or 25,000 decisions we make a day unconsciously. What was it?
35, my man. You're taking my thunder. 35.
35,000 from his book last night. Yeah, amazing.
I like to get things done in advance, usually planning it out in stages. And one of the reasons is the dopamine rush of completing tasks in separate, divisions, as opposed to getting it done last minute all at the same time. I get better gratification down the line.
Wow, thank you for that. Again, and back to that pleasure, pain, motivation, that rush we get. We can get it in the present, honoring our future self. We can get it in the present, dividing things up into small tasks that we complete. And then we think again about that next small task. You heard the expression, how to eat a whale one bite at a time. Again, that's converting a tough future thing. You don't want to think about the whole thing to the small step and then enjoying in the present the rush, the dopamine rush of having finished that thing. And then we get to think, okay, what's the next step? That's all I'm going to think about. Just the next, I don't care the rest of it. Just what's the next? Oh, good, let's do that. That's incredibly helpful, right, for beating procrastination. I mean, there's a lot of techniques. So just talking about them really helps us, empower us, and can break us out of the fear that we have sometimes of something in the future, right? Okay. All right, now I'd like you guys to spend another 5 minutes on item 2. And I'd like you guys to think through or read through as much as you can in the next 5 minutes, okay? Maybe we'll spend 4.5 minutes, then we'll talk. As much of question 2 as you can. Okay. That very first question, how many people had a long-term above 20% or above? Anybody? Yeah. How many people had 30% or above for long-term? There you go. So would you guys, looks like the long-termers are on this table, would you guys like to talk about how that works? Is it personal? Is it job?
For me, I think it's kind of just natural. It's not something I want to do. Actually, it's something I would like to shift more to the present. But I don't feel like it's a bad thing. I don't fight it. I try to reduce it by using some of the techniques we were talking about and stay more in the present for more optimal performance of the task at hand. But it's a good thing when it's got its purpose, it's got its reason to be there. So,
are you able to align your job around it, some of your job responsibilities, so that you can use that natural skill to help your team or help your organization?
yes. Even though a lot of the day-to-day tasks in my job are more reactive on an ad hoc basis, you can't quite plan for it, but you can plan for the stress and be calm in the moment when these high-priority last-second tasks or ad hocs come in. So that's when it kind of comes in handy too.
One of the things that I found in doing these exercises is that we have people who skew to immediate foresight. They're very good at thinking through now to the end of day. They're very good at task management and focus. And people who, like Nick and I, like to go to the long term first, and then we have to pull ourselves back, right? And so it's really helpful to realize you have those natural proclivities and see if you can get a job or a set of responsibilities. Volunteer for them if you don't have them in your job description, where you can help people in each of those. Another thing that really helps, I think, is recognizing that if you want to get good at any of these 4 types of foresight, the fastest way to get good is to focus on now till end of day foresight. And the reason why is because the skills that you'll get in the foresight action cycle, in closing a loop, apply to all of them. But the skills happen a lot faster in immediate foresight, that next step thing we talked about. So that next step could be the bite of the whale on long-term foresight, could be the next year, and then you complete and feel good and have a little party. Or it could be the next 10 minutes for immediate foresight, and then you complete and you go, and you get that dopamine rush. But it's really the same thing. And it's closing those loops, as we'll see in our last exercise, that's really the most powerful way to turn foresight into effective action. So now 2A and then B and C are like Stephen Covey. How many people have heard of him? 7 Habits of Highly Effective People. All right, so this is the Eisenhower matrix. It comes from a quote by General Eisenhower that the important and the urgent are the 2 fundamental tasks that we face. And he was a great delegator. He had a huge staff, so he was constantly pushing stuff down into quadrant 3. It's important, it's urgent, but it's not important, so let somebody else do it. We can all do that. We can all delegate, and you can delegate things to the future, even if you don't have someone you can give it to. And that's another way to push things into quadrant 3. And as Covey says, we want to get as much of our focus on quadrant 2 as we can, but we have to fight our way through quadrant 1 to get to quadrant 2. We have to put out fires before we can do the long-term thinking. All right? Now, what was, for people in this last question on page 3, how many people had the hardest time filling out a quadrant 2 task? Anybody? Oh, could you tell us why? I'm really curious. Yeah.
I was mostly thinking in terms of work when I was answering this, but if it's urgent and important, then I'll knock it out. 3 made sense. I don't have a problem delegating. That's kind of where I was thinking for 2, because I spend a lot of time putting out fires, and if something's important but not urgent, I usually give someone else on my team the opportunity to do it. So that's why, I was kind of, for me personally, at work, I was trying to think of what have I put off that I need to get done, and I was like, I don't know, I give it to someone else.
So it sounds like you've got a really, a team that you trust and you can manage very well. Right, that team, and you're in that mode, that management mode a lot. A possible value for you, challenge for you, is to think through what are the things you're not doing right now that really could change the game. And that's Stephen Covey's 1 question. So let's turn to the next page and see that. The one thing, the Covey question, comes in 2 areas. What's the one thing you're not doing right now, the quadrant 1, quadrant 2 thing, that if you were doing it would make everything else that you're doing? You only get permission to choose 1. You have to really prioritize here. It's a real quadrant 2 decision. So if you haven't done this, let's spend 1 minute just answering that, and answer it for either the personal 2B or the professional 2C. Just pick either one and just spend 1 minute. The one thing. Greatest positive results. Better and more consistently. Those are the key words. Doing that better, doing it more consistently. Closing the loop. Okay.
That low baritone voice. I don't know that I'm up for that. Unless I hear it. Yeah, right.
Would anyone like to share one of these? I know this is tough. This is tough to personally discuss. But I'd love to hear if anyone wants to give a 2B or a 2C. What's the one thing that just kind of spoke to you? You realized, I'm not doing that enough, and I need to generate lots of habits around doing that more.
Hi. Sorry for being late.
No worries.
So sorry, I didn't hear what you asked. I just got here.
What? If you ask yourself, that's great. See, now this guy, he's very relaxed, very in the present. Okay. If you were to ask yourself one thing that if you were to do it better and more consistently would yield the greatest positive results right now in your personal life or your professional life, pick either one. It's a tough question. Give yourself at least 20 seconds thinking about it. See if it pops out.
So something that I should do consistently.
One thing, if you did it better and more consistently, would make everything else better in a positive way, measurably positive way.
Take better care of myself.
Hey, self-care, right there.
Yeah, I think that's it.
So, your name?
Guilherme.
Guy. So Guy just went deep into quadrant 2, and that's really a stake. You can use this one thing as a stake back into quadrant 2 because you're just going to the top of your priority list for quadrant 2 when you ask the one thing question. And you just it's just like, you just stick it back on the top of the mountain and you see it and you say, okay, what am I going to do? And then you focus on the immediate foresight, now to the end of day, now to the next loss of consciousness. That's immediate foresight, okay? Some of you who might sleep only once every 2 days, your immediate foresight goes out to the next time you lose consciousness and then wake up again a new man, a new woman, right? That's all immediate foresight. What's that one thing I can do? What's the task I can do right now that'll make that one thing better? That's, you pushed yourself into quadrant 2. All right. Question, page 5 gives you some techniques for improving long-term foresight. Now we're actually going to jump. I gave you the negative and positive, defensive pessimism and strategic optimism yesterday. We talked about that and the benefit of both and how we have people who love to go to the defensive pessimism first and then people who go to the strategic optimism first and how we need both. We actually, all of us tell each other self-fulfilling prophecies about the future that are optimistic and self-preventing prophecies about the future that are bad things that we don't want to happen. So we scare ourselves with a self-preventing prophecy. Somebody who's really good at honoring themselves in the present may also tell themselves scare stories about how bad they would feel if they didn't carpe diem, right? Grab that moment now and do that thing I got to do for self-care or whatever it is, right? So just remember defensive pessimism, strategic optimism. This woman, Gabrielle Oettingen, wrote a book called Rethinking Positive Thinking. It's a beautiful book. It has all the evidence that positive thinkers don't get as much done as people who are negative, positive plan. I'll say it one more time. Positive, negative plan. Okay. Think about the positive. Think about all the ways you can fail. Think about the positive again. Think about the ways you could fail. Then plan, then act. That's called grasp strategy. And we're going to do that right now. Let's go to page 7. So it's a type of realism, which is balancing past and future, positive and negative. That's really helpful for you. So I'd like you to go to page 8. Okay. So there's her book, Rethinking Positive Thinking. Okay, and it's one-to-one mental contrasting, positive to negative. Then you'll find books like this, What to Say When You Talk to Yourself, which recommends 2-to-1 mental contrasting, having 2 optimistic thoughts for every pessimistic thought. There's a pile of them out there, and they all have different theories. Okay, it's hard to say which one is right, but she has all this evidence for how much more people get done in terms of SATs, in terms of weight loss, everything when they do grasp strategy. She calls it WHOOP, actually, before you do it. Wish, outcome, obstacles, plan. That's the short version of it. But I like the longer version, grasp. And here's what it looks like. So how many people saw this movie? Free Solo. Did your palms sweat? Yeah, my palms sweat watching this. Him climb that little cap, right? Okay. So, this is eating the whale, one grasp at a time. Okay? This is how we do it. This is how we do it in our sentiment. Remember, sentiment is more fundamental than everything. Okay, thank you. First, we imagine the goal. Is it worthy and difficult and short-term enough that you can complete it or fail and learn from it? Make sure it is. Okay, that's the next grasp you're going for up the mountain. Then, what's your reality? How far do I have to go? How do I measure that? How much weight do I have to lose? How much do I have to change my whatever? Then you think about the advantages you put on your happy face, right? Your happy state in your mind. Imagine yourself getting there, honoring your future self. Wow, cool. I'm on top of the mountain. Thank you. Then you go to the dark place again. Okay, man. Think of all the ways I've failed in the past to do the thing that I'm trying to do right now. It's going to happen again, isn't it? And then once you've been in that dark place for a minute or so, go to your plan. And your plan has to have 2 things in it: if-then statements and key resources. Now, an if-then statement is, if this bad thing happens, this is what I'm going to do. I'm going to get up, I'm going to take a walk, take a break, come back to the center, then sit my ass down in the chair and finish the thing I'm supposed to be doing, right? Whatever it is. But you have the if-then plan in your head because you're anticipating the setback. And key resources are the mental resources, the personal, the network resources, the physical resources that will help you execute the plan. So that's it. That's grasp. Simple as that. Okay. And this is clinically tested. She has all the data on all the people. She's done it at the University of Hamburg and at New York University for 10 years. She's done these exercises to see how much people can improve when they go away from just positive thinking to grasp thinking or mental contrasting. Okay. So, I'm not going to have time to do the last 2 exercises, but they're here for you. And I'd like to end, so we have looks like a minute and a half left for any general comments or questions people have about any of the stuff we've discussed. Who would like to give us some comments or thoughts? Yeah.
Yesterday you were talking. Yesterday at one of the tables you were talking about one. It's just always impressive how well read you are, and you were talking about a reading trick that you were going to give to the whole group on how to consume as much books like movies that you said you'd done before. So would you talk about that?
Yes. Thank you, Josh. Okay, so in the last minute here, I'm going to give you how to read a book like a movie. All right. It's 4 pages in my brief guide. So all the details are in there. So just email me if you want a copy of the book, and you can read those 4 pages. But in a minute, what it is every one of us watches movies, almost every one of us. If you want to read 50 books a year, think of all the movies you watch. And for the next month, swap out, if you watch a movie a week, as I typically do, swap out the movie time for book reading time. Spend the same exact amount of time reading the book. Find a cool place to sit down, bring some, nice food and a little stimulating drink, nice quiet place. And for the next 2 hours, whatever that time, it's got to be time limited. What you do is what I did with Will's book last night. I go, oh, this is cool. I've got a whole hour. I'm going to read Will's book like a movie. So what you do is you just flip through the table of contents. Oh, that looks like the most interesting chapter. That one's maybe the second most interesting for me. Then I go to the first and last pages of those chapters. I read those. I go, I'm interested in this other chapter now. And I go and I look at that one. And then I pick at least one chapter. And I pick an introduction. I look at the introduction and see if it's half the time it's a beautiful summary of the book. So I'm going to focus on that. The other half the time it's some kind of general type thing. And okay, I'm not going to focus on that. Then I go to the index. I circle at least 10 things I've never seen before. And then I go right into the book and I read around those things. And in every one of these cases, what I do is I'm building an index at the front. I do this with magazines too. And I put a half-page white label on the inside front cover of the magazine. You know, the Avery white labels, you know, 8.5 by 11, half page, two per page. I put one of those on the front. So I have a place to write. And then I have these 8 codes that I use, these reading codes, things I might want to do, things I want to research, people I want to check out, organizations I want to check out, claims, tips, things I want to share. And as I'm reading stuff, I just go, oh, that's really cool. And I'll throw it up in the index in the front with a little page number next to it until I run out of time. And then what I do is I put that thing in the red pile at the end of my 2 hours. Okay, I've skimmed, I've chosen, I've scanned, I've made this beautiful little index. And then 2 weeks later, I go back to the index and I look at it and say, do I still want to do any of that stuff? And usually it's about a third of that stuff I'm still excited about. And then I transfer that stuff to my day planner. The rest of it I just leave in the index. And then I either teach the book to somebody else and have them teach me if I have direct reports. So every Friday we'll have a reading, a bag lunch where everyone gives a 5-minute report on the book that they spent 2 hours reading in this way. So we're all learning cool stuff, right? And then finally, after I've done that, I either go back to it myself or I teach it to somebody else for 5 minutes. When I've done those things, finally the book, I'm allowed to put it up on my shelf. And then I order another book because there's so many amazing books you can read like a movie and so many amazing experiences you can create. And if you do that, what you'll discover is you're going to read actually old school 2, 3, 4 times more books. Why? Because you're going to pull 1 or 2 of those books off that shelf again and go back to it and read it cover to cover because it's going to stay in your dreams. It's going to wake up at night thinking, oh, that was such a cool book. I got to go back. And so these are some really powerful tools. Thank you.
I was about to say, speaking of cool books.
Yes, thank you. So that's a useful tool. Yep.
These, I think, this is what Will's going to cover. So I think if you don't already have a copy, we have some here in the back so that we can get you guys another book for your shelf.
Thank you.
John,
Yes.
Thank you so much for
thank
that.
you, guys.